Imagine yourself at the foot of a looming fortress, its jagged silhouette stabbing into a gray sky heavy with storm, the kind of sky that promises cold rain and darker things to come. Banners whip in the wind, their colors dulled by damp, while smoke seeps from chimneys and merges with the mist. To the outsider, a medieval castle is a monument to power, to control, to invincibility. But step closer and the illusion begins to fray. Cross the drawbridge slick with mud and horse dung. Pass beneath the iron-spiked portcullis and you are not greeted by majesty, you are slapped by the stench of humanity. Smoke that refuses to climb the chimneys, sweat from bodies packed too close, the sour temps of spilled ale, the ammonia of piss seeping into the rushes strewn across the floor. This, you realize, is not a palace, it is a cage of stone. And the strangest part is not that people lived here. The strangest part is that they survived it all. Inside, the great hall looms before you, a cavernous chamber where the ceiling disappears into shadow, blackened by centuries of smoke. The rushes beneath, your feet crunch and squelch with things best left unexamined. Dogs fight over a bone in the corner. Chickens flap under benches. A serving boy slops a bucket of slop into the rushes, because here, the floor is both carpet and trash heap. In the far distance, a fire roars in a great hearth, but its warmth reaches no one beyond arm's length. The stone walls do not hold heat, they swallow it, greedily pulling the fire into their cold bellies until every man, woman, and child shivers in their furs. Even kings, wrapped in ermine, felt the bite of frost on their lips. In winter, ice formed on the inside of window shutters. Imagine sleeping under layers of blankets, fur upon fur, and still waking with your breath crystallized in the air. This was the comfort of power. The soundscape is no kinder. The castle breathes with noise, the clank of armor echoing through corridors, the lowing of cattle in pens, the constant drip-drip of water from unseen cracks in the ceiling. Servants scurry, their footsteps quick and nervous, as they carry trays, fetch water, haul logs. Somewhere, a baby cries. Somewhere else, a knight bellows at his squire. The lord's hounds bay in the courtyard, their howls bouncing off stone, like the ghosts of wolves. You cannot escape it. The castle hums with restless life. And yet it is not the sound of security, it is the sound of barely contained chaos. And then there is food. The feasts of lords and ladies are legend: whole boars roasted with apples in their mouths, trenchers piled with venison pies, goblets brimming with spiced wine. But the legend was a mask, a lie told with meat and gold. Behind the spectacle, reality gnawed. Every autumn, after harvest, the castle cellars swelled with stores, salted pork stacked in barrels, smoked fish strung from rafters, wheels of cheese aged until they were as hard as stone. But supplies had to last through the winter, and through sieges that could drag on for months, sometimes years. By spring, bread was stale, cheese was moldy, meat stank of brine. The servants boiled and reboiled broth until it was thin as water. Rats scurried across grain sacks, sometimes caught and eaten themselves. There are whispers and chronicles of sieges so long that men boiled leather into soup, of hunger so deep that mothers looked at their children with haunted eyes. Yet, at the Lord's table, the theater continued. The highborn drank wine and tore into roasted game while peasants gnawed on crusts of black bread and pottage oats boiled with a miser's handful of peas. Survival was not fair. It was a performance, and only those with wealth could pretend it wasn't misery. Even drink, the simplest comfort, was dangerous. The moat glittered outside, a silver circle around the walls, but it was no more than a cesspit in disguise. Refuse, piss, blood from butchery, even corpses found their way into its waters. Wells dug inside courtyards seemed safer, but too often they sat too near the latrines. One sip of water could mean death by dysentery, and so beer and ale became life itself. Even children drank ale for breakfast. Imagine a 6-year-old starting his day with a wooden cup of beer because the alternative was poison. Weak ale was safer than water, and so the entire castle walked in a mild haze of alcohol from dawn to dusk. But the true enemy was invisible. Disease stalked the castle like a shadow no wall could bar. Imagine hundreds of people crammed into damp, smoky halls, sleeping nose to nose, coughing, sweating, scratching at flea bites. The rushes beneath your feet weren't replaced daily, or even weekly. Sometimes they lay for months, absorbing spit, blood, vomit, and worse. They teemed with lice, with rats, with the filth of countless feet. Dysentery spread like wildfire. Fevers burned through households. And when plague arrived, carried on fleas tucked into the fur of rats. Even the thickest walls were useless. Death swept into castles with the same ease it swept through villages. Only here, it had more bodies to claim. And yet, somehow, life went on. The secret was not strength of stone but resilience of spirit. Servants rose before dawn, fetching buckets of water from wells, hauling firewood until their backs broke, kneading bread in smoky kitchens. Women brewed ale, stitched clothes, and mixed herbs into poultices that kept households alive. Knights clattered through courtyards, their swords clanging in drills that were as much theater as preparation. Pages carried messages, squires polished armor, Minstrels plucked lutes in smoky corners while lords schemed over goblets of wine within these walls. Survival was not passive, it was a labor performed endlessly, invisibly, desperately, and when war came, the castle became both salvation and coffin. Imagine the horns sounding from the tower, the gates slamming shut, the portcullis rattling down. The enemy camps outside, their banners sprouting like weeds on the horizon. Weeks pass, months' supplies dwindle. Fear grows thick as the smoke in the hall. Children cry with hunger. Knights, restless, quarrel with each other. Rumors slither through the corridors that the enemy is tunneling beneath the walls, that poison has been slipped into the well, that a traitor is among them. A siege is not a clash of swords, it is a slow choking. You survive by rationing bread to crumbs, by stretching ale with water, by praying the enemy tires before you starve. And when disease creeps in claiming dozens at a time, you pray not for victory but for mourning. The castle was a paradox. It promised safety but bred danger, promised comfort but delivered misery, promised majesty but reeked of filth. And yet, people clung to it. Why? Because outside the walls, the world was no kinder. Beyond the moat lay forests filled with wolves, bandits roaming roads, rival lords hungry for land. A peasant in his cottage might breathe fresher air, drink cleaner water, sleep with fewer fleas. But he was also more exposed, more vulnerable. A castle, for all its miseries, was a shield. However flawed, people endured because they had no choice. The walls may have been prison, but they were also protection. And within them, humanity did what it always does. It adapted, it schemed, it laughed in the face of misery. It endured. Imagine your own, a place within it. Are you the lord, draped in fur, sipping wine to hide the taste of rot in your meat? Are you the servant, rising before dawn to fetch icy water for your master's chamber? Are you the knight, restless in your armor, sharpening your sword, though you may never swing it? Are you the cook, scouring mold from cheese and serving it with a flourish as if it were treasure? Survival in a castle was not about grand battles, it was about endless little acts of defiance. To eat stale bread and call it a feast, to light a torch against a hole of shadows, to sleep one more night despite the cold, to wake and do it again. So, how did people survive in medieval castles? With lies, with stubbornness, with rituals of hope. They survived because they had to. They survived because humanity is too stubborn to stop, and every stone in those walls carries the echoes of their endurance. And as you stand in the great hall, listening to the wind rattle the shutters, hearing the cough of someone dying in the shadows, feeling the cold creep up your spine, you realize survival here was not just a mystery. It was a miracle performed every day, disguised as ordinary life. And if you think survival meant only scraping by with food and fire, you'd be mistaken, because within these walls survival also meant enduring the politics that seeped deeper than any chiller. Castle was never just stone. It was power compressed into mortar, ambition set into towers. Every smile in the great hall might hide a dagger. Every toast at the Lord's table might conceal poison in the cup. Imagine eating a slice of bread and wondering if it's laced with something meant to make your death look like illness. Imagine lying awake in a chamber lit by flickering tallow candles, wondering if the whisper outside the door belongs to a lover, a servant, or an assassin. To survive in a castle, you needed more than food. You needed cunning. You needed to read the language of glances, to know when to speak and when to bite your tongue until it bled. For all its physical miseries, the castle's greater cruelty was its unending theater of ambition. But ambition was also fuel. Take the servants, for instance. To the outsider, they were shadows carrying buckets, bowing low, vanishing into passageways. But each one had eyes, ears, and secrets. A scullion could overhear more than a knight if he kept silent while scrubbing pots. A chambermaid who tucked in a noble might carry whispers through corridors more powerful than swords. Entire kingdoms teetered because of secrets carried on the soft soles of servants' shoes. And they survived not just by obedience, but by knowing when to use what they knew. To live in a castle was to live inside a hive, buzzing with hidden wars no chronicler ever dared set to parchment. And then there was the strange intimacy of filth. Privacy was rare. Chambers often held not one but dozens, servants and nobles sleeping side by side. Even a king might be attended at all hours, his body never truly his own. His chamber filled with squires, chaplains, and guards, toilets if you could call them, that were little more than garderobes, holes in the wall where waste dropped down into cesspits, or worse, straight into the moat. The stench lingered, clung to clothing, to hair, to skin. And yet, even here, survival meant adaptation. Herbs were scattered across rushes to mask the smell, lavender tucked into sleeves, rosemary burned as incense. People perfumed themselves not out of vanity but necessity, to disguise the fact that everyone reeked of smoke, sweat, and shit. Imagine wooing a lover in this atmosphere, whispering sweet words while lice crawl at your collar and rats scuttle at your feet. Romance was possible, but only if you had a strong stomach. Survival also depended on rhythm, on rituals that gave order to chaos. The day began with a toll of bells, summoning the household to prayer. Faith was not a luxury, it was lifeline. When walls closed in and plague lurked in every shadow, people clung to the idea that survival was God's will. Chapels rang with voices begging saints for protection, for food, for warmth. Priests moved through halls sprinkling holy water, banishing demons that looked suspiciously like mold and fever. In a world where medicine meant leeches and ground herbs, belief became a kind of armor, and in that faith, people found the strength to wake each morning and face another day of smoke and cold. But faith did not stop hunger. Picture a winter siege, snow piled high against battlements, enemy fires glowing red beyond the walls, food dwindling to scraps. In the kitchens, cooks boiled bones until they dissolved into greasy broth. Bread was stretched with sawdust or ground acorns. Children cried themselves hoarse with hunger. The Lord still dined. Of course, his survival meant the household's survival, but even he felt the pinch as portions shrank and meat disappeared from his table. Rats grew fat in granaries while people grew gaunt in halls. Survival became a waiting game. Would the enemy starve you out before you starved yourselves? Every meal was a countdown, every sip of ale a prayer that the next barrel wouldn't run dry. Yet even in this desperation there was resilience. People sang to distract themselves from hunger, told tales by firelight to make the night shorter, danced when there was no reason to dance. Laughter became rebellion, a way to remind themselves they were still alive. Children played with carved wooden toys, pretending their world wasn't collapsing. Lovers found each other in shadows, seeking warmth not just of bodies but of defiance against the cold void pressing at the walls. These small rebellions were survival, as essential as bread. Because to endure a castle was not merely to endure its hardships, it was to carve out fragments of joy from the jaws of misery. And then there was war. Castles existed because of it, thrived because of it, and suffered because of it. When battle came, survival took on another meaning. Imagine standing on the battlements as arrows hissed through the air, the thud of catapult stones rattling the very walls beneath your feet. The Lord rallies his men. Women carry buckets of water to quench fires sparked by flaming missiles. Children cower in corners praying the walls hold. Survival is no longer about food or cold, it is about whether the stone itself will keep its promise of protection. But war was also spectacle. The Lord must be seen on the walls, calm and commanding, even if his stomach churns with fear. Knights must mount their horses, gleaming in armor, even if they know a single arrow could fell them. Survival in war was not just about winning, it was about being seen to endure, about convincing the enemy and your own people that you could last one day longer. And after the battle, the castle itself bore scars. Stones cracked by siege engines, courtyards soaked in blood, halls filled with the groans of the wounded. Here, survival meant tending wounds with whatever could be found, honey smeared on cuts, herbs packed into gashes, prayers whispered over fevers. Many died not from swords, but from infection. A splintered arrow could kill more, certainly, than a blade. And yet, some survived. And those who did became legends whispered over ale. Their survival proof that life inside the stone monster could persist even after it had been torn open by war. Survival also demanded endurance through boredom, a quieter torment rarely recorded but just as sharp. Imagine months, even years, inside walls you could not leave. The same corridors, the same halls, the same damp chambers. Days blurred together in the monotony of survival. For peasants, this was life work. Eat, sleep, repeat. For nobles, it was worse. Trapped in gilded cages, watching the same faces, hearing the same songs, suffocating in tedium. Boredom could drive a person to madness, and so diversions became survival. Tournaments were staged, feasts thrown, hunts arranged, not merely for pleasure but to remind the castle that it was alive. Even chess, played by candlelight, was a form of survival, a way to keep the mind sharp when the body was trapped. And yet through all this, there was beauty, too. A tapestry glowing in torchlight, a minstrel's song lifting smoke-thick air, the momentary warmth of a hearth when logs flared bright, a child's laughter echoing through corridors, a woman's voice carrying a hymn into rafters black with soot. These fleeting sparks were the mystery of survival, that even here, in filth and fear, life found ways to be beautiful. People didn't just survive castles. They lived in them, they grew in them, they dreamed in them. And in that lies the strangest truth of all. The castle was not only stone, it was flesh, blood, and spirit, enduring against the odds. So when we look back at these fortresses and imagine knights in shining armor and ladies in gowns sweeping through candlelit halls, remember the other truth. The stink, the hunger, the disease, the fear, the endless labor of survival disguised as grandeur. Remember that to live in a castle was not to live in a fairy tale, but in a riddle of stone and shadow, where every day alive was victory, and every breath was defiance.